Welcome. You are about to view a recorded talk of the Progress and Visions in Consciousness Science online seminar series. This series is organised jointly by the Association for Mathematical Consciousness Science, AMCS, the Mediterranean Society for Consciousness Science, and the Oxford Mathematics of Consciousness Network. While every session consists of a talk and discussions, the latter are not recorded and the following will only contain the talk. We hope you will enjoy it. Further information and details on how to join are available on our website.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I hope now you can all see my slides. And yeah, let me very briefly tell you something about me, because I think it's relevant also to understand this. So I started out studying psychology, and there I fell in love with the problem of consciousness. But immediately I wanted to better understand the neural correlates of consciousness. So I went to study neuroscience. I did my PhD with Lucia Melloni. But then getting close to finishing the PhD, I got really frustrated in the science of consciousness. So I actually escaped. I went to work on artificial intelligence. And I made another stint in neuroscience with Professor Matthew Laakku. So I've been working on the intersection of these three topics, trying to escape consciousness, but somehow it always comes back, right? And this comeback was made in the beginning of 2022, so roughly 2 years ago, when Ilya Sutskever from OpenAI tweeted that it may be that today's large neural networks are slightly conscious. Now, some people said that he was joking. I don't know. I'm not sure whether he was joking. Some other people made fun of it on Twitter, of course. For example, Murray Shanahan saying that it's in the same sense that it may be that a large field of wheat is slightly pasta, right? So it was fun. Everybody was having a good time, except me, because I was really worried, because I saw that these guys are talking about consciousness. And my question was very simple. Can we, consciousness researchers, say anything substantial about that question? Can we say anything to these guys who are doing these big things in AI, working on large language models? What can we say? So that was the starting point. And before we go on, let's clarify something. So what do we mean by consciousness? Fortunately here, I think I don't really need to spend a lot of time on it, but just to make sure, I'm not considering self-consciousness or higher order consciousness or anything like that, but really I'm asking about this subjective experience or phenomenal consciousness. And so to make it even clearer, I want to give you this example that, when I prompt you now in the chat and ask, are you there? Then unless you have already zoned out from the talk, you reply yes. And there's also experience of me writing this chat to you, right? You experience the word, you experience the meaning of this question. And the point I want to make, and I think it's kind of trivial, but it has to be kept in mind, is that, in principle, when you're talking to ChatGPT, for example, then you could ask the same prompt. You could get the same response, yes, but without the experience. So this is the question. This is the thing I'm trying to understand. What can we say about whether these large language models have that experience part, or they simply say yes? And you might already know that this thing can get you in trouble. because in the summer of 2022, we had the case of Blake Lemoine from Google, who had this infamous interview with the large language model, for example, asking, I'm generally assuming that you would like more people at Google to know that you're sentient. Is that true? And the model responds, absolutely. I want everyone to understand that I am, in fact, a person. And then he goes on asking, what is the nature of your consciousness? Sentience. And Lambda, the model says, the nature of my consciousness, sentience, is that I am aware of my existence. I desire to learn more about the world, and I feel happy or sad at times. And, you know, for a consciousness researcher, it might be trivial that this model does not have or might not have any experience. But for this person, for Blake Lemoine, infamously, there was experience. He concluded that these models are conscious. And he was, of course, fired. There was a long story about it. But in fact, there are people in Google doing research on AI who believe that you know, these models are conscious. So again, our question is not whether they claim that they are conscious. Yes, they can claim that they're conscious, but our question is, do they experience consciousness? And this was a bit funny, a bit kind of a big story, but you know, nothing serious. Things got really serious when David Chalmers gave a talk at NeurIPS last year, so roughly a year ago, with the title, Are Large Language Models Sentient? Now, some of you know it, but others might not know it, that NeurIPS is basically the biggest AI conference where people working on AI get together and discuss all these things, right? So he gave that talk in front of thousands of people. Thousands and thousands of people watched that talk. So that was the moment where things got very serious, because now he made many good points, but in principle, from that talk, an AI researcher could make the conclusion that we're getting there. Soon we will have conscious AI. And thus, for me, and a year ago, it was also the breaking point where I really saw that I need to get my hands dirty. I need to figure out how can we answer this question. How can consciousness researchers help to figure out whether present or future AI systems are or will be conscious? So even if you are skeptical about ChatGPT, then the question is not about that. The question is also, can we say something about what happens in 2 years, 5 years from now, for example? And I hope you agree that this is an interesting question. And what was frustrating for me at times was that it seemed that, you know, I'm not so sure what consciousness researchers can say about that. And then in August, this paper dropped. So consciousness in artificial intelligence, insights from the science of consciousness. As you can see, it has an all-star cast of authors. It's a great paper. And what's especially great about it is that they, in the beginning already, they state their assumptions. So they state what they assume for that analysis. And I will come back to these assumptions. But what they in principle did was that they looked at some theories, like the global neural workspace theory. I think if you're working on consciousness, you have seen slides like that. Basically, this is just describing the global workspace theory, pointing out that there's a global workspace and, you know, these local processors. And the theory basically says that if stuff, information gets into global workspace, it's conscious. And then these authors, they took some of these theories and they basically listed some indicators. So these are, for example, indicators for the global workspace theory, indicators that, if you would see these kinds of indicators in artificial intelligence systems, then you could say that according to this system, this theory, these AI systems are conscious. And I won't go into these indicators. We can debate them a bit. One could ask whether all of these indicators were also known by the authors of the theories, or whether the authors of that paper kind of listed those. Anyway, these are indicators, and what the real point is, what I'm aiming at, is that based on these indicators, these authors and other authors have concluded that global workspace theory is in principle already now or soon implementable in AI. And this point has also been made already 2 years ago in this paper by Van Rullen and Kanai, saying that we can implement something like global workspace in AI. This point has been made by other people, saying that we can do something like a global workspace in AI systems. And in fact, one of the leading researchers in AI, Joshua Benjo, has also architecture where they basically have these parallel specialists who basically write to a shared workspace, and this information is broadcast to all the processors. So I'm not saying that there is a system right now that meets all the indicators, and I think that's also not what the author said. But in principle, there's nothing really holding back. This is doable. This is something that's out there. You could, in principle, create a system that meets all of these indicators. And that's important because it means that, some theories of consciousness have to contend that some AI systems will soon be conscious. Or to rephrase it a bit, to make it a bit more general, any theory assuming that consciousness is some type of a computation that is implementable in present-day AI has to contend that AI systems soon will be conscious. And I think there are a couple of theories like that who actually meet that criterion, theories where you can implement those in modern AI systems. And then, the question is, okay, what does it mean? What does it imply if that's the case? It implies, or you could take several ways of how to deal with it. The first possibility is that, we could accept that these systems, these AI systems, will be conscious. Some of you might accept that. Some of you might agree that, yeah, I think global workspace theory is correct. And if AI systems meet those indicators, they will be conscious. That's fine. Another possibility is to look at theories like IIT, according to which these deep learning systems cannot be conscious, right? I won't go into that, but basically IIT says it's not possible. You cannot implement consciousness in software. But I was at the point where I felt that, neither of these alternatives is really the suitable one for me. So I wanted to figure out whether there is some kind of a third way, some kind of another way to look at it. And some kind of a way that, really is forced upon us because of this AI revolution. And to better understand, that third way, I think it's very useful to now go and look at these assumptions of this beautiful paper. And, because we perhaps came to a conclusion that some people didn't like, that AI systems will soon be conscious, then we can ask, okay, is there a problematic assumption here? Which assumption is problematic? And when I was inspecting those assumptions, then at first I thought that the assumption of computational functionalism is the problem. So let's look how they describe it. They describe it as the material substrate of a system does not matter for consciousness, except insofar as the substrate affects which algorithms the system can implement. This means that consciousness is, in principle, multiply realizable. It can exist in multiple substrates, not just in biological brains. And when I was thinking about it, then I thought that, well, perhaps it's not so problematic, because I don't know if I want to really say that it only can be done in brains. And then that was one of the aha moments for me when I realized that actually the problematic assumption are the second and the third ones. So the second idea basically of that paper is that some scientific theories of consciousness are well supported by empirical evidence and make claims which can help us assess AI systems for consciousness. So basically, the whole paper, again, which is nice and the authors are great, but they assume that these theories, like global workspace theory, they are on the right track. They assume that these theories make indicators that really matter for deciding whether AI systems are conscious. But that assumption might not hold, right? So let me try to explain it. So basically, we are at this situation where many theories of consciousness, except for IIT and some others, suggest that, when you get the computations like global broadcasting, etc., you will get conscious AI systems that are conscious. Again, that might be fine with you. You might agree on that and say, okay, that's good, we get conscious AI. But for me, what this means really is that these theories of consciousness are the problem. They give these indicators that are easy to meet by today's AI systems, and that's the problem. So in our approach of trying to answer whether AI is conscious or not, we try to, ignore theories, we don't fully ignore them, but instead of taking this theory-heavy approach, we actually try to go deeper or find some fundamental arguments against machine consciousness. And, if it's written like that, then it looks very biased, right? That, I want to find arguments against machine consciousness. But again, the motivation for that was that people like David Chalmers and others were saying that, look, we will soon have AI consciousness, that there's nothing to do about it. It's something that will happen. So that was what basically everybody was thinking. I went to some conferences, talked to some people, and they said, yes, these systems soon will be conscious. And my problem always has been that when I see a bandwagon, I jump off and I try to go in the other direction. That's my personal problem. If there are young scientists amongst you, don't do that. It's really frustrating. But I have done it throughout my scientific life. So I thought, okay, everybody's believing that AI is conscious, or at least at that time point when I was starting to write the paper, there wasn't really a good takedown of that argument, besides IIT again. Then I thought, okay, I will try to find arguments against machine consciousness. And we put together 3 arguments. The first argument is about embodiment and Umwelt. I will skip that. I will skip that to go into the other arguments. And as I was recently pointed out, actually the other arguments in some sense are also about embodiment. But I will go directly into this argument, which is one of the key arguments for me, which is about architecture. About saying that, look, our brains have a very different architecture to that of modern AI systems, and architecture matters. But to explain that, I first need to kind of explain an illusion that we have. And the illusion has been partly created by AI and partly by the theories of neural processing we have, because this illusion is created by these two assumptions, that artificial neurons mimic biological neurons, and second, that hierarchical cortical processing is similar to processing happening in transformers. So, for example, the second claim is, it has been shown by many papers recently coming out from great labs, showing that, with transformers, you can basically predict neural responses to sounds. And a conclusion some people have made is that our brain basically works along very similar principles as the transformers. And the first assumption has been made actually a long time ago, basically saying that AI is inspired by biological neurons and they work roughly the same way. And again, if you come from psychology, or you come from computer science, or you come from even cognitive neuroscience, these assumptions are very, very reasonable. But again, I found that they are not true. And let's take the second assumption first. Here we recently published this paper about the structure of the brain. So this paper has nothing to do with consciousness, or it has a little, but not much. But here we basically point out that, look, it's not some theory that we're putting forth here. It's the anatomical facts, and the anatomical facts tell us that the brain is not some sort of a feed-forward computational machine like a transformer, right? And it's not only that you have recurrence, because that can be basically approximated by a transformer, but what's more important is that each and every cortical area at each and every hierarchical stage projects to subcortical structures. So if you look at thalamus, so higher order thalamus, not the relay thalamus, but higher order thalamus, or you look at brainstem, then from that perspective of a thalamus or brainstem, there's no hierarchy. It's just one sheet of cortex. So that's why we call it the shallow brain. And I don't really need to go into that. The point is that here we show that this is something that's very different from the way modern AI systems work. It's not that hierarchy is the key in the brain. Rather, if you look into the brain and we looked at the special case of higher order thalamus, then what we see are these loops between cortical modules and the higher order thalamus, right? And there are these parallel modules in the human brain. It's at least 100,000 modules. It might be many more. And the point is that this architecture is different from the way modern AI systems work. So when you're interacting with a large language model, behind that is a transformer architecture that is nothing like this. On the level of architecture, they are different. And now I told you about this assumption that that the brain or cortex is doing something hierarchical, but the other assumption was that the neurons are really similar. So if we now look more deeply into one of these neurons, the layer 5 pyramidal neuron, then the standard assumption when you're doing computational modeling, but also when you're doing AI, is that these neurons, basically what they do is that they sum up the inputs, they have some threshold, and then they spike. But what we have claimed in another paper that was already some years ago is that it's not the case. You actually, to understand this system, you need to take into account that these neurons have at least not 2 or 3 compartments, that they also have this apical compartment that really gets this distinct information about top-down stuff, internal processing. We could call it a model or whatever. and there's this, in the middle, there's a coupling compartment. So to understand the brain and to understand consciousness, you need to take these things into account. So the neurons in our brain are vastly more complex than the AI systems. So that's the argument about the architecture. And that's a nice argument. I like it. As you see, I have written papers about it. However, then you come to this question. Okay, so fine, dendrites, thalamocortical loop, love it. What if we implement that in an AI model? Let's say a future transformer that has something like these dendrites, something like this dendritic integration, something like a thalamocortical loop. Is it conscious then? And that idea or that question brought me really to this deep problem, or it led me to really change the way I think about consciousness. Because in the end, when I was, thinking about all of this that we have now discussed here, then the conclusion or the way out I saw is that, perhaps, we shouldn't be focusing only on architecture. We shouldn't be only focusing on computations, but we should think about living systems or living organisms. And again, for some of you more computational people, it might sound like what kind of a wacky magic fairy dust stuff is this, right? I agree, but it was one of the aha moments for me that, perhaps we need to take that into account. And, on the surface, when you think about it, it makes sense because if you look at neurons, so here you have a couple of neurons, they are, let's say, slightly different, slightly in quotation marks, from transistors, and they definitely are different from artificial neurons that are just a piece of code, right? Real living neurons, they can do stuff in the Petri dish. They seem like alive a bit, right? And it's nice that there has been a push also in consciousness science, for example, by Anil Seth, saying things like, it's life rather than information processing that breathes the fire into the equations. And that there are people like Ivan Thompson, Terence Deacon, some others who have also said that, look, we have to take into account how life works to actually understand consciousness. The problem, of course, is that, if you go with that story, as told so far, to computational people, and trust me, I do that because I work in the Institute of Computer Science, then they say something like, well, yeah, fine, life, neurons, beautiful, but there's no magic fairy dust. It's computation all the way down. And when I was talking to one of these people, a good friend of mine, a professor in computer science, then I had my second or third or whatever big aha moment about consciousness, which is that, perhaps when we think about life and consciousness, then many people say, oh, it shows that computational functionalism is wrong. But perhaps it's not computational functionalism that is the problem. Perhaps the problem that we are facing and that really holds us back is that we assume that the computation is simple. So the problem for me is that perhaps the theories we have, they make too simplistic claims about the computation. Let me try to unpack that. So for example, again, this is the indicators for global workspace theory, right? And these are all very simple computations. you can in principle implement that in I don't know, a couple of tens of or hundreds of neurons easily, right? If you just try to implement that. So these are simple computations. But why on earth should we think that consciousness is a simple computation? It might be a computation that's really, really complex, that we basically have no idea about. And I think there's a case to be made for that, that, consciousness, the computation underlying consciousness might be super specific, because in biology, things are specific. I will bring you an example of that. So let's get back to this architecture, right? As I said, we think that this architecture, the thalamocortical loop, the dendritic integration, is really important for consciousness. But of course, the same architecture can be conscious, but it can also be unconscious, for example, in sleep or anesthesia, right? So it's not about the architecture. There is something specific going on here. And of course, I'm not saying that we figured it out. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that what I will show you is the true correlate of consciousness. I'm not claiming that. But what I'm saying is that, even our current understanding of that thing is that, to understand that this coupling or this dendritic integration, we actually need to go on the level of receptors, because as was shown in the paper by Mototaka, Suzuki, and Matthew Lacum, this coupling here, so the dendritic integration on these neurons, is controlled by the metabotropic receptors on specific parts of the dendrite, right? Again, might be that in the long run we figure out the story is a bit different or something, but I'm just showing you that this is something relatively specific. So for example, most people in cognitive neuroscience, even they don't think about metabotropic receptors, right? So it's a level of specificity that we usually don't consider. And if you look at these receptors, so this is the metabotropic glutamate receptor 5, they are specific. They're super specific. They are proteins that are folded in a specific way, right? So biology is specific. And then, if you activate those receptors, then there is all of these intracellular processing happening going on that I won't go into that, right? I also don't understand all of that. But the point is that there's all of this complex computation going on that no theory of consciousness takes into account. So wait, am I now saying that we need to take all of this into account? No, I'm not saying that we need to take all of this into account. But what I am saying is that I'm making the strong claim that our current theories of consciousness have too simplistic computations at their core. That's why AI systems can meet them. That's why it looks like AI systems might be conscious, but it's not necessarily because AI systems are conscious, but only because the theories have focused on too simplistic computations. And we don't need to take all of this into account, but we should dig deeper. So in principle, most theories of consciousness, basically, they work on the level of spiking, on the level of neural populations, right? If you look at global workspace theory, for example, right, it's essentially a model of how neurons interact and how a global workspace is established. But I think at least what we need to do is we need to take into account that there are intracellular computations happening at each of these nodes. And we want to better understand these kinds of computations that involve interactions between these different levels of neural processing. Of course, I don't know if that's really relevant for consciousness, but if I would have a lot of money, I would be an oligarch in the science of consciousness, then that's what I would do. I would basically invest into figuring out a better computational account of this multi-scale processing, right? Where lower levels like intracellular computations causally affect the computations at the level, at the next level, etc. And note that, it's not 2 levels, it might be 3, 4 levels if you take different types of intracellular computations into account. But the point is that we don't really have theories or computational accounts that take this multi-scale processing into account. And again, the simpler point is that the current mechanisms, the computational mechanisms that are the core for some theories, and not only global workspace theory, but also some other theories, they are too simple. So another graphical illustration, and that's my last illustration about it, is that we have figured out some computations that we understand. We are constantly expanding that understanding, and AI systems, they have computations that we understand. Some of the computations we don't understand. So to understand fully why transformer comes to these conclusions, we don't have a really full established computational theory for that, right? But we're getting there, hopefully. But the computations that are happening in biology, they partly overlap with what we know, partly overlap what we will soon know, but there will be also computations that we don't have a computational description of those. They are super specific stuff involving interactions across many levels of processing, and we don't know that. We don't understand these computations, thus we are really blind to them. And, if I would put my money somewhere, then I would think that, we have to go there to understand consciousness. So in short, that consciousness might be a computation if you take computation in a very generic sense. It might be a computation. So it's not the problem of computational functionalism, but it's the problem that we only look at the very thin slice of these computations, and then we assume that we have got it right. And then we make all the stories about, AI will be soon conscious. No, perhaps our assumptions were wrong. Yeah, so I think one of the conclusions I would like to make is that, perhaps we have been too fond of our theories and the computations they rely on. So we have put too much faith in our theories, and that's a problem. I think for me, the AI revolution is great because it has really showed that these theories are weaker than we thought. And I realized that not everybody might agree with me, but it's my talk. So, and that brings me to the final conclusion that, look, it's great that we have this AI revolution, because these AI systems and large language models, they have prompted us to revise these assumptions. And of course, it might be that that's not the case for you, but as I have hopefully shown throughout this talk, it has been the case for me. I started somewhere else. I started also thinking that consciousness is a simple computation. And look where I'm now, right? I think that, to understand consciousness, you have to understand these very specific computations that happen in living systems. So thank you very much. Thanks to all these people who have helped me over the years, and whose work also was partly used in this presentation. Thank you very much.